We're going to be very efficient in this session, make up a little bit of time, but also try and give you the same level of insight. Does that work for everyone's seating? Great. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play a little bit of an MC moderator, and I'll be asking questions to everyone up here. We're going to look at CX through the lens of social, and I think this is extremely relevant. All of you that think about social, social as it relates to customer service and CX has certainly been top of mind for many years. So we're going to look through that lens, but also ask some of those big strategic questions and then get into kind of what's working today, but also some of the big obvious challenges, like when we have to go and present as social working, we still present audience count numbers, right? We don't necessarily dig as deep as we may like to. When we thought about this session, we went back and forth. We did a little bit of a study working with Danny at LiveWorld, where we went out and talked to 10 different companies in pharma. And we were going to present that up front and then jump into the panel. We said, well, let's do it as like present some insight and then get the panel to react. So we're going to do that. But then to start it off with, Jay at Underscore is going to kick us off. And I said, Jay, can you give us just kind of a brief opening framework for how we think about this strategically? We tend to get in the weeds very quickly when we think of social, what's your meta strategy, what's your Insta, threads, whatever. So we're going to kick it off with Jay talking about how do we think about this holistically.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. I brought a prop with me, so to be very dramatic. My name is Jay Cruz. I work at Underscore, SVP of Media there. I am addicted to TikTok. I'm the first one. When it first came on, I got to do the videos. I got to do all that. And anytime something new comes in, like Threads, now I'm checking that out. But it sort of goes with how a lot of our clients, they want to do social. Oh, we got to be in social. We have to be in social. Okay, let's take a step back. Instead of jumping right into TikTok and doing your videos and massively failing, what exactly are your intentions? So it's pretty obvious to everyone here in the room when you're doing a campaign, but I just want to call this out here is, let's establish clear objectives for social. You've got your business goals, you've got your overall marketing strategies, your strategic imperatives, and then let's get down to the channels. What is the role of social? So the question that I ask is, what do you want to do with social? Do you want to get in front of your audience? Or do you want to converse with them and engage with them? So first, understanding what role that is, because that determines of how much you put into paid versus organic. Are you looking to generate leads and help build your CRM, your database, and build a community? And then ultimately, is that social is supposed to build awareness, or you're driving education? Or are you generating, you want them to take an action? Go to your site to fill out a form, or stay within the platform. A lot of these questions help us to first establish that foundation before we get into, well, what's the metrics and the performance? What's your objectives? Because once we get into that and establish those objectives, there are metrics that we can look at. So how do we look at them? There are, at the top left, are the metrics that we monitor. Us as a media company, we will always monitor these metrics. So understanding your audience, the reach of your audience, how organically are we growing that audience? Is there what that growth rate is month to month? How does that compare to your competitors? And then demographics. We like geography because if there's a geography story that there's a lot of engagement there, well, let's tie that in to what the HCPs that are in that area, and can we connect those two audiences and messages together? And then there's engagement. If you're posting, what are those likes, shares, comments, engagement rates, and video views? And then ultimately that conversion. Is the role of social to keep them within that platform and engage, or are you getting them to go to your site to get that engagement as well? All these data points we look at, but ultimately it's about what that data is. How does it all tie in together? And what we like to say is, what story does the data tell you? Is it giving us a qualified audience engagement? If it's not, then do we need to revamp our targeting and refine it? It's constantly refining our target audience. What are the types of insights? And how do we attribute the activity or potentially RX lift to social? How can we build that up? Do we have the right technology in place, the pixels in place? And then we talked about targeting, and how does this affect the overall digital ecosystem? Yes, we can work within the social and see how that performs, but how does that tie in to your overall mix? And then ultimately, that helps drive the story of what your business goals are is the brand awareness. Different types of metrics can help drive that brand awareness. The reach is there. Is it growth? How does it compare to competitors? And what the engagements are like. Are we getting enough lead gens, qualified lead gens? And then that difference between traffic of web versus platform. So a lot of these metrics we can look at, but it's a matter of what's the story that we want to tell and how do we take those actionable insights. And how we do that is collaboration. It's so easy to bring this up, but I think it's a very key of, do we have all the key stakeholders in place? Not just from a media company, not just from a creative agency, but from the client's perspective as well, from a pharma company. Who are the players there? Not just our marketing folks, but the data folks as well. And how does it all tie in together? The one thing with the data that we have from a media perspective is, what we like to do is, how can we support the sales field? If we have somebody engaged on Doximity, well, what does that mean? Are they engaging with specific content that we can inform our sales team of to help them, help improve their conversations with their doctors? And what are the different roles and responsibilities? And what's that infrastructure and that data ecosystem? And how does it all tie in together? Where does social fit amongst all the different channels, including marketing as well as media? And then I put here agreement on the right formulas. It's really about the ROI. We're here to talk about ROI. But what is that formula for a brand awareness? What is that ROI? It could be tied into an RX, but ultimately, what's the value of somebody going to a site and watching a video? What's the value of someone who's downloading some doctor discussion guide and applying that to then tie into your social to see if that ROI is delivered?
Excellent. So we just heard from Jay, and I'm going to go back in my quest for efficiency. I didn't properly introduce everyone. So we heard from Jay at Underscore. We've got Danny at LiveWorld. We've got Joyce at Harmony. I'm trying to go in order here. And Claudia with Amgen as of about a week ago, previously, was recently rolled into the Amgen family. And I'm Mark with DHC. So I am going to try and go rapid fire through about 5 different topics here. We're going to end on ROI specifically, but we want to build the case strategically in terms of why we're talking about this. So audience and marketing mix, as I mentioned when I talked with Danny about this several months ago, we had this conversation about, we're not pushback, but more we're getting kind of the questions, the tough questions on how do we think in framing strategically of social. And when you look at it, so we went out and talked to 10 different pharma companies as a part of this process. And one of the first areas we looked at was, who are you targeting? This is a really kind of interesting one strategically because it does cascade down into ROI. When we said, do you target physician, consumer, or equal, okay? Almost half the audience said they consider HCP as their quote-unquote primary, and we'll get into this because there's some big differences. You can scale consumer in ways you can't necessarily scale HCP in terms of spend, right? So you may be a company saying, I'm spending a ton on consumer, but we still think the HCP engagement is primary. The other half looking at the audiences equally, and a very small number targeting DTC as an exclusive. So I'm going to start off with, and I'm going to pick on Joyce to begin with. When you think primary audience, and obviously this changes by the type of the company and the type of the products, but as a company, do you think of them equally, or how do we think about the true audience in social today when we think about that strategy at the very high level?
Thanks, Mark. I work for Harmony Biosciences. We're a rare disease company in the sleep neuro space. So I have a rare disease lens, so my lens is very focused. But the way we really look at things, social to us is just part of our overall content strategy, right? It's just another channel, or channels. But it's not social amongst or just to itself, right? It's where's our audience and meeting them where they're at. It depends if we're doing disease ed versus if we're doing branded, and we're in social for both. But I think looking at the content and your objectives, to Jay's point, we know that we have physicians that will engage with our disease ed, and they're engaging with the content because they're referring our disease ed properties and some of the award-winning work that we've done in our disease ed to their patients because it's a valuable resource. Now, they're not doing that for brand, but we're equally really targeting consumers and HCPs, and sometimes the HCPs are consuming the consumer content because they want to refer it, and then they're also engaging with HCP social media where, we have Doximity or Soma or things that we're doing. It's more important, I think, to our consumer marketing team. It's a bigger part of their marketing mix, social, than it is on the HCP side. But it's really on a channel-by-channel, case-by-case basis, and then it's different for branded and unbranded. So it really kind of, it depends. It all has to be tied back to the strategic objectives.
Excellent. Claudia, you're in a similar position with kind of very targeted products. How do you think about that balance between the two?
So I work on the consumer team for Tepezza, and we have both disease education and branded Facebook pages, and we do both for paid social as well. We don't really have a lot of physician, advertising on Facebook and stuff for the HCP side, but in terms of our consumers, they're very much on the social channels, and so it's a huge part of our mix. I mean, we get a very, 35% of our traffic to the website, or T1 Actions is from social.
Wow.
So it's a key portion of our, of our advertising and engaging with consumers.
Excellent. Danny, you have a nice front seat to looking at the industry across a lot of different clients. What are you seeing in terms of that balance? Obviously, HCP became very interesting during the pandemic when access was cut off in terms of social. What do you see today? How do you see that balance?
We're seeing an equal emphasis depending upon what brands we're working on. But we found an incredibly ascendant use of HCP. I don't know whether you've been following the studies, but DHC did one, Sermo did one. There's a bunch of other studies that indicate that 80% of HCPs responding to these questionnaires indicate that they use social media for professional purposes. And in our latest study, half of those people indicated that they use social media, half of the HCPs use social media during the workday. So in sense, social media is emerging as kind of a clinical, day-to-day tool for physicians. And then you also have the question of DTC. Can we drive traffic to the HCPs? And we've all seen the research data which indicates that for the most part, HCPs are affable. If a patient asks for a particular drug or asks for a particular therapy, a huge percentage of their doctors is willing to try it and give it to them. So we're seeing a kind of a dual thrust in the social arena.
Excellent. Jay, I'm going to switch to the next question and let you kick that one off. So when we went out and talked to Pharma, we had them kind of force rank, and just to highly summarize it, ROI was the biggest one, right? How do we define it? How do we think about it? Too many platforms to keep up with, and thinking about creating enough content for the platforms. These were kind of the big three. Much lower was things around brand safety. Obviously, brand safety is important, and one could argue, hey, we've got really good tools to address some of these further down the list, and we're struggling with ones on the top. So talk to me a little bit about what do you see kind of top of mind that we absolutely have to address in 2023?
So I focus a lot on media strategy and media planning, and what I always, on the DTC side, it's all about the targeting. We do a lot of work in rare disease. It's how close can I get to that audience. I always do like a charades with partners. Here's my patient, who can get me as close as possible, right? So I think targeting, and the key thing about targeting is it's once you set a plan, it's constantly refining it throughout the campaign. If anybody has a campaign that still sets it and forgets it, then you're in the wrong business, because you're constantly learning, data constantly learns, and how do you refine and adjust that? So on the DTC side, I think, especially for rare disease, it's that targeting is what I'm focusing on. From an HCP side, platforms outside of the consumer platforms like your Doximities, your Sermos, it's the content I think I would focus. I wouldn't focus more on the cost per engagement is going to be high compared to everything else. The cost per HCP could be a little bit higher. I would focus more on, once you have that engagement, it's who's engaging. We get a lot of these physician level data. It's understanding if Dr. Jones is engaging, well, he's closer down the funnel, then what's that next step that we want to serve them, or get that information to the sales team and say, hey, they've engaged with this content on Doximity. This could help you in your conversations. So a lot of it is getting that data over to everybody. I talk about infrastructure, and I think Oz talked about it earlier, that what's that ecosystem, and how do we get all that data to them on an HCP side? And that's what we're always challenged to make sure that we get that in front of you.
Excellent. Joyce, so you're seeking more budget to go back and kind of double or triple down on some of the social initiatives. What are some of those typical pushbacks still in 23?
I don't think we have as many pushbacks for social as we used to have. I think it's still just understanding a bit of the ROI, right? Or the time to value. I liked when that was said earlier today. I think understanding around HCP, can it be tied directly to script lift? And I think the answer is no, it can't. But if you're really thinking about omni-channel, it's putting all of your media together because you have to strategically have the right content, again, in the right place, and then what's the role of social at that point in time? We're looking at doing HCP segmentation, so we can't have the same creative for someone who's writing our product versus not writing our product, right? One size doesn't fit all. So if you can get someone, through setting up lead gen, if you want to call it that, to now have awareness of your product and then take a conversion, which is your ROI, to go to your website because you've got that tracked and so on, and now they've downloaded a valuable piece of content which can show intent, which maybe it's your prescription form, maybe it's not, right? But even a patient video, there's ROI there because you're getting that engagement and you're moving them down the funnel of consuming the right content, which is going to help them consider your product. So it's not so much about the channel as just part of the whole, story of taking the provider or the patient through what you need to do with them, which is either awareness or engagement, to get them closer to that next decision, right,
Great.
about treatment.
Nice, and you've set us up very well we're going to close it out with some deep dive into ROI. Claudia, you mentioned about a third of audience coming. Obviously some very impressive numbers. What holds you back from doing more, potentially?
Budget?
Okay.
Time? No, actually, I shouldn't say because we found that there is a point of diminishing return with budgets. We were given a large budget a couple months ago, and there's a point where it just is too much. But I think creative is really important, having to turn it out, and you have to turn it out quickly. I was at Meta's offices a few weeks ago, and they're saying every 3 months we should be, putting through new creative. And to do that, you need to have a team that's willing to create it, and we don't necessarily have that. And so I've been working with Shuttle Rock, which is a smaller agency that will take your existing creative and animate it, as well as working with like a small agency that's a little less expensive to get, creative completely refreshed all the time. But it's just, it's time, and then it's the audience targeting. Like you saying, set it, forget it. Like I had to drill that into my media agency. I cannot even tell you. They're like, campaign budget optimization. I'm like, no, like you have to allow your different audiences to have a chance to, to perform and to use budget. Because if you always let the system optimize, it's always going to go to look like. Always, because that's a larger audience. And retargeting and re-engagement, which is for us very often the better performing group, because we're trying to pull people through all the different ads, almost like I think of it as like the CRM, like it's messaging. I mean, Tepez is a biologic. Thyroid eye disease is often misdiagnosed. Patients go to 5 to 6 doctors before they get diagnosed. So we're constantly trying to educate them and make sure that when they go on treatment, they've made the right decision, they're with the right doctor, and they feel good about their decision. So we're using social to help them do that,
I totally agree. And the retargeting, it takes time. Like you really have to test and learn. There is no set it and forget it. You have to have 3 months of your campaign to just see how it's doing. And we often have to tweak and tweak. And is it the lookalike or is it the retargeting? And it's different for HCP versus consumer. And, you also have to think about when you have advanced, practitioners, right? Speaking to them, if they're writing scripts, like that's different sometimes than speaking to the MDs directly, because some of them are writing under an MD, some of them aren't. So getting that targeting, it takes time to get it right. So you just have to plan all that into the budget because it does take time.
So if I can characterize the stumbling blocks, the first is coverage, targeting. Are we getting to the right people? Can we identify the audience we need to reach, and can we find the platform that's going to deliver them? Second would be cost, which has been mentioned. And oftentimes, social is compared with programmatic or search in budget fights. Third would be compliance. Can we get the message through MLR? Is it compliant with all the rules and regulations? And lastly, to your point, Claudia, creative. Can we form the right message? Can we produce it in the right kind of time? Do we have the right modality to engage and inspire the audience? So those are the 4 stumbling blocks I think we're all seeing across the practices and that we've got to confront in terms of selling social to the executive level of our companies.
Excellent. So let's go rapid fire through just some insights on social platforms, and then we're going to close it out with the ROI deep dive. So real quick, obviously physicians are a little bit different in that we have gated, ungated communities. This is some data from Sermo. Ease of use is with the ungated platforms. When they want really highly credible information, they may be going to HCP-specific content. When we reached out to Pharma, again, and asked kind of from an ROI perspective, on the HCP side, who do you think is doing better? We got a nice mix. It's not one company really standing out from another. They have different values. On the consumer side, no surprise here, we've got kind of some new emergents like TikTok. Maybe you're still trying to figure out some of the newer ones that have gone through issues recently. I'm going to start with Jay real quickly, and I'm not going to cover all these, but let's think ROI very quickly, your brief comments on how do you answer the question? Because it always seems like, well, this platform does really well from an ROI with this audience, and I can't just paint the whole platform with one brush. How do you answer that question of, because that's a very direct ROI outcome, is you got to pick the right platform for what you're trying to do. How do you answer that question?
I mean, it's testing everything. Like, I get a lot of media partners, as you guys do, and it's the first thing they say. Here's the ROI is 10 to 1, 6 to 1, 5 to 1. That's great. But that doesn't mean anything to me based on the audience that we have to work with. So a lot of it is we test it out. So I'm more of a, I guess, control freak in that I want to see the data myself. I want to be able to make that formula and that assessment myself to see if that 10 to 1 is actuals. So a lot of it is we try to, it's about on the platform, is our audience there? What are they doing? And then we can at least, let's test it out. As Joyce said, it takes 3 months. Ideally, you want to see how it performs. And then from there, then we can either continue on with it or find another opportunity. We don't want to set and forget it. So as I talk about refining targeting, refining the campaign as well, moving from one channel to another, and it's all about where the audience is and see if we can, depending if we have the budget, if we can, find where those audiences are and test that in order to see if that ROI is indeed the right one.
Claudia, obviously you're focused on consumer. How do you answer that question kind of in 23? Where do you get the biggest bang for your buck?
Well, for us, I mean, we do Facebook. We haven't done any of the other, besides Facebook and Instagram, we haven't touched TikTok. I'm afraid of Reddit, I'll be honest. They keep trying to push Reddit on us, and I'm like, I won't even go and search Pez on there. I'm afraid of the IEs I might see. So part of it's like monitoring. We need to have a team that's going to monitor, like, the comments, the responses, whether they're positive or negative. And so to have that's right now, that's our internal brand comms teams who does that. So, if we don't have that, is it scalable? Are patients there? I mean, majority of women, women in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Are they really on some of these? We're not sure, There are some younger, but it's just, do we have the budget and the time to create what needs to be done for that platform?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like when the organic to posting, it comes down to, do you have the infrastructure to support that? Because especially, I used to work years ago on JCPenney's. And so there was a team built in to monitor on Oscar night when there was comments going on. Imagine with Pharma, it's even more so that you have to constantly stay on top of it. So that in itself is a stumbling block.
And report any AE you see. And that takes time to fill out that form and submit it over and ensure it's done within 24 hours and compliantly.
So let's jump in it. Close your eyes for a second. I'm going to skip forward to the ROI. Okay? There we go. Boom. We're going to close out with some ROI insights. I'm just trying to keep us on track, and I know we've kind of brought some of these up, and this was the meat of it anyway in the previous discussion. So let's jump into the ROI and metrics. Danny alluded to this a little bit. There was actually a study that you did looking at kind of 2/3 of physicians saying it changed perception in some way, about half saying it's changing an RX decision in some way. So we're looking at this in the grand scheme of things from an ROI. It also has a significant CX impact in terms of how they want to get feedback. When we talk to Pharma high level, virtually every company defined it as a net positive. It wasn't like we found companies that said, oh, this doesn't work, right? It has value. You gotta figure out where it applies. 80% had some set of quantitative goals, and this is really where we're gonna get into the kind of the weeds here a little bit. 70% believing that social in some ways was performing than some of their other media channels. So there was clearly some wins here, right? You said you may find diminishing returns, but we're getting significant value in some areas. Where are they spending their time? And this is where it was a big disconnect, right? In a lot of the top 20 pharma companies was it still is a reach, impressions, engagement, audience growth game, right? And the reason being, when I gotta go to senior management, they need something they understand, right? When you start to get down, you get into the more fancy acronyms here, right? The stuff that only the media folks may understand, all the way down to the conversion metrics, the share of voice. But we're still, for the most part, what we heard a lot in top 10 was, we're presenting this top here, and we wanna get to the bottom, and we're getting there, but it takes time. Part of it's education, part of it's better data. So let's jump into it. I'm gonna start with Danny. Let's talk about why are we limited to this kind of top here of the simplistic metrics, and what does it take to get us further down that curve into some of these advanced attribution models or deeper insights?
Well, it starts with what Jay started with, which is a clear understanding of the objectives. What do you want to do, and how do we measure the performance against the objective? The other is, and I think somebody mentioned it in a previous panel, the data sets don't connect with each other naturally. So easy comparisons are difficult, easy calculations are difficult. And third, there is a bias against social because people don't believe that it's effective at lead generation. But you can't take the old-fashioned formula and say, okay, we got X number of impressions, or we got X number of downloads, we spent Y amount of money, we divide X by Y, and we have a number that we can present. That doesn't adequately tell you what's going on. So again, it's about finitely managing your expectations and your goals against the results that you can find.
Excellent. Claudia, how do we get to some of those more advanced, or are we answering the questions with what we're looking at today for the most part?
Well, I connect my agencies together, right? So I have Epsilon, who's managing our, the website and all the analytics there, meeting with Wavemaker, who does our social media, and ensure that they're talking together and, conversing over and pulling together the data so we know what's happening on the meta side and then what's happening actually on the engagement once people are on the website. And so that's how we, that's basically what we're doing there. And
So Joyce, some deep dive. How do we get, are we in a position that we do have the insights we need to kind of justify the value, or how do you see some of that path getting deeper over time?
Well, we look at our media, and social's part of media in totality. And we're looking at, how is it driving against our strategic objectives? And we look at what portion of engagement we're getting coming from social, versus other media. So we see really clearly that social moves the needle. We see that search really moves the needle. And we know that when we dial up and dial down our spend, there's a direct correlation. Mm-hmm. We'll do that around conferences. I mean, it's actually really pretty simple to really just tweak things and see how things move. And we look at it all the time. But, you have to look at it. You have to look at it in totality, and then you have to also look at it again for branded and unbranded. We also see that, on the branded side, we have a different experience and different engagement with, Facebook versus Instagram. So each channel also mm-hmm. has a purpose and a role. Yeah. They're different. So you have to keep kind of all of these things in mind. And like we've been really successful in social, and we're using a lot of social, and it does work. But it's really around engagement. It doesn't matter if you have, 10,000 followers, if they're not doing or taking the desired action, whether it's your HCP or, your consumer or DTC audience. If you need them to be doing something and converting, whatever that conversion is, that's what you're looking for. You want engaged users, right?
Yes.
So that's the ROI. A smaller amount of highly qualified, targeted, and engaged users are more valuable than, I have 1 million followers. Great. If someone just, they subscribe to you once and they don't engage with your brand, then mm-hmm. social's not working for you because you might not have the right strategy, creative, whatever, because it takes all of this to make it work in unison.
Yeah, and you're making an excellent point. It's how this fits relative to every other channel we're using.
Right.
It's the bigger picture. So Jay, close us out. You opened us up close it out with how do we get there from here?
I drive my team nuts whenever I say, let's map it out. I'm old school, like the whole post on a board, let's map it out, everything. That's everything from not just our media, that's just a component, but even from a communication strategy, content strategy, marketing strategy, where does everything fit? And then where's the audience fit in each of those steps? And then from there, we get to the specific channels of social. As an example, what does that do? How does that different map? So then at least we have that ecosystem. That's another word that I drive my team crazy about. And we understand, okay, this is where we want to track everything. And at least if we have that game plan, then we can start feeding out and getting all the data sets together and how do we compile it all together. Because that's the biggest thing, as someone said on the last panel that we have, and Danny said earlier, there's all this data. How do you connect it all together? Well, I think it's, well, what data is available? Who has it, and how do we axe it out? So I think if we just start it out, just map it out, and then we can see where we're at each time.
Yeah, begin with the end in mind. So thank you very much to the panel. I'll put it on the slide, and I'll personally thank you as well. Joyce, Claudia, Danny, and Jay. And I think I'm going to turn it over. Well, I'll do the clap here as well. And I will turn it over to Simon if you want to do it virtually from there.
No, thank you very much. That's again, just a real quick round of applause. Obviously, that was wonderfully conducted from Mark, Joyce, Claudia, Danny, and Jay. Obviously, thank you all for your, obviously that concludes our mid-morning segment. Again, we've had 2 panels and a dual presentation from Ryan and Lauren at Click earlier. So we've had some really good talks this morning. It is lunchtime, so we've got just under an hour or so. I'm going to open these 2 doors just behind me here. Go in, there's a buffet lunch, grab what you need to grab, continue the conversations. We'll reconvene back in here at 2 p.m. for our afternoon session. And as mentioned, if you missed any sessions, we are recording and we'll make them available on demand after, but we'll be reconvening at 2 p.m. Thank you again, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you.